So I'll take you through all these fantastic questions. They're all right on the mark. On the price of oil, it's no longer controlled by OPEC. I think this is the bus and speed. You can't press the brake pedal anymore, because what happens with oil is we have a very slow increase in production of oil. In kind of funny call it production, but it's 2 to 3% a year. It's been pretty constant for the last 20 years. We're getting demand increase in 5 to 6% right now, most of it from China. And we're seeing the price of, this is the long tail of Walmart, if you want. We sent our tchotchkes to be produced in China. They created wealth. Wealth becomes consumption. Consumption becomes cars. Cars become oil. Raises the price here. So we're paying the Walmart tax. Okay? And we're paying it, as you said, in the price of oil. Interestingly enough, we said 10 years ago we cannot tax oil. We just did. Only instead of DC collecting the tax, OPEC is collecting the tax. So, and we know we can, by the way, tax oil by another 100%. We ran that experiment as well. It's called Europe. So Europe is at $8.50 a gallon, and they still consume as much oil as we're consuming. So we know that you can do all these policies. It's just a question of will, not a question of can it be done. Interestingly enough, as far as will, I predict that if we don't solve it in the 4 years of whoever is number 44, we will transfer wealth at an order of about $2 to $3 trillion, even at today's prices, to some other person. And if whoever is 44 does not have a policy of oil discontinuity, he's not going to be number 44 for 8 years. He can only be 44 for 4 years, because the economy will go to hell. At some point, people will realize we're giving them funny green papers for molecules that are hard to get, and they're going to stop supplying us. And that's the point we really need to be afraid of. What happens the day when people say dollars are no good for oil? And that's a scary thought, because the economy goes to hell on that day. On plug-in hybrids, we both, if you think of plug-in hybrid, think of the Volt, all right, the GM Volt, great car. Both of them are electric vehicles. They both effectively are an electric vehicle, with both answering the fifth element. If you thought of the question of the 4 contract elements, they're answering the fifth question of how do I go on the long trip, on the exceptional trip, a bit differently. So both need a grid of charging spots across the entire country, because otherwise you don't really have an electric vehicle. You have a small engine car which is very inefficient going through a battery. So the grid part of the infrastructure, which is about 2/3 of the cost, is required for both solutions. But one extends the drive by replacing the battery. The other one extends the drive by putting an engine and a generator inside the car. Engine and generator inside a car is a $5,000 solution per car. An exchange mechanism in the infrastructure outside the car is a $100 per car solution. So the ratio, we're at about 2% cost for the range extensions. Hence, we're pragmatics. That's why I'm saying this is a lot simpler to do and less costly. There's another element, which is that element of the business model. If you get a product that has 2 different elements, roughly costing the same, car and battery, put into one package with one price, but 2 different life cycles, and it doesn't matter which one is longer or shorter than the other, you can never assess after 3 years how much life is left in the combined product. Hence, it's almost impossible to get a residual value on that product. Hence, it's almost impossible to get financing for that product. Can you imagine cars selling in the US without financing? Now, that's the problem we're looking at. We're not just looking at the issue of how do we build an exotic car for 60,000 people in the US. We're solving for how do you get off oil, period. And so hybridization, in our mind, was a very interesting interim step, but it's the sort of the in-between between the ape and the human. And you don't invest much in schools for the in-between between apes and humans. You sort of go to humans directly. And that's pretty much where we're looking at. My view is that it's not a negative thing to do. It's a good step, but it's a lot easier to make a Volt with an exchangeable battery without an engine and a generator than it is to make the Volt that they're making right now. The one they're making right now is much more complicated and harder to sell. As far as climate, how do you do clean? I think this is part of where branding and consumer awareness comes into play. We're going to put on, think of us as a mobile operator. If you think of Better Place, we're like AT&T. We don't make the cars, we operate the network. And one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to set a clock that shows how many green, clean electrons have we bought and how many electrons have we put into the cars. And that clock will be front and center on our website, so you will be able to see that if you drive our cars, you're driving on 0 CO2 bill. The difference in price between clean electrons and dirty electrons is 1 cent a mile. Now, if I show you that I drive on clean electrons, and let's say I'm AT&T, and Verizon shows you that they're cheaper by 1 cent a mile, but they're not clean, would you pay the extra cent a mile to be clean? You'd probably be paying 4 or 5 cents extra to be clean. That 1 cent is the exact situation that Coca-Cola had using corn-based fructose in their sugar, like bad sugar in their drinks. Now, it was a 99% margin business. Then it became a 99.5% margin business, but with a bad brand. That cost them sales. So what we're going to do is we're going to start from day one and say, if you don't drive clean electrons, it's not a good solution. What it does is a very interesting element, because if you think of cars solving, if we solve for the car, we solve 20% of the CO2 emission. Right? 20% of the CO2 emissions in the world is Kyoto. So a better place at scale is Kyoto. But if we also buy clean generation, we reduce the price of clean electrons so that by the end of our cycle, at the end of the 10 years, clean electrons are cheaper than coal-based electrons. And nobody builds another coal plant at that point. That's another 40% of the CO2 emission. That's the treaty that Blair is now working to get for the world for 2050. I'm telling you, we could get there a decade after we finish the car side. So we can get there in 2030, 60% reduction in our CO2 emissions. Now, that's the question we need to start asking ourselves on climate. We don't come in with percent reductions. We come in with big question frameworks. How do you run a country without oil? How do you generate electrons without CO2? How do you build cities without cement? I mean, you ask the questions that are 20% reduction in CO2. What we did is the first framework of that magnitude. Nobody comes in and says, I can take 20% to 30% of the CO2 out of the equation with one solution at no cost to the consumer. And those are the kind of solutions we got to put in place to solve this problem.
Shai, two more questions.